So Beautiful Thing, the very popular, successful LGBTQ drama comedy, it's back. Originally released in 1996, it's back and for the first time ever is available on Blu-ray. My name is Phil, we are Boys on Film. Chris and Matt are here. Now this is going to be very interesting because we have all seen this movie before. I mean, who hasn't, let's face it. But it's obviously back in Blu-ray form. I haven't seen all of the features, but you've even watched it with the commentary, which I didn't do last night.
Yeah, I've got to say, commentaries normally... I'm a bit take it or leave it with commentaries because sometimes they literally are just sitting around just chatting shit to each other and that's really boring.
Can you name anything that you've seen that is like that? Do you want to name and shame?
There's an element of that about this commentary, but actually I quite like the commentary with this because they do wander off occasionally, but they are largely sitting there reminiscing about the experience of making the film and talking about the scenes that are in front of you at the time. And actually, that was genuinely quite interesting because of the kind of anniversarial nature of this, if that's a word, the fact that we're celebrating it coming out again on Blu-ray. So I actually quite enjoyed the commentary, to be fair, yeah.
So it's based on the award-winning play by Jonathan Harvey, who I'm such a massive fan of. I mean, gimme. TV shows, theatre shows. Obviously, this was first performed at the Bush Theatre, coming-of-age film. So many people treasure this film. They see it as something very important. I mean, how old were you? I'm guessing you were a similar age to me, Chris, because you're not that much older than me. Were you 26?
On camera.
26.
Right, look, my true confession about this is that I'm so much of a fan of this film that I have the soundtrack CD, because that's what we used to buy it. I have the screenplay, which I've read many times, and because I'm an architect and because it's set in this incredible location, I also have books about Thamesmead, which is basically an additional character in the film anyway, which is something that people talk about kind of in the commentaries and stuff. So yeah, I to be fair, cards on the table, I love this film. I think it's a really well constructed film. I think it reflects a really interesting time. It's set in a time that's very interesting in the UK as well. And I think the performances and the writing, the production is incredible. And I was so excited to see that this has been put out in Blu-ray with some additional features, because it's just it's a new way to love something that I've always loved, and I was all over it. Absolutely loved it.
So Mamas and the Papas feature strongly in the soundtrack, and I was watching the Q&A earlier, which you've seen obviously, Chris, as well, and Jonathan Harvey was talking about the fact that Mamas and the Papas, there could have been problems with not being able to afford the soundtrack, and I think it was Mama Cassie's sister, wasn't it, that got involved and kind of signed it all off. So it's good that the music is there, and it's one thing that people do talk about amongst obviously the other reasons that, the very funny script and the performances, and obviously the fact that it, like you say, is shot in Thamesmead and it's really iconic and people just remember all of that. Matt, from somebody who's obviously in the US, did you know much about the area where it was shot? Have you been there? Because I know you've been to London, but have you been to Thamesmead?
No, I haven't, but I could get the idea that it was a tower block kind of housing estate is what you would call it in England. You would not call it something that nice in America, but...
Very brutalist, though, as well. Very futuristic. It was somewhere where...
Staggering, beautiful piece of architecture. Can't believe they've demolished it, but that's for a whole different podcast.
Yeah.
But for me, the setting is... and they talk about this a lot in some of the special features, but the setting is very much a part of the film. The fact that it happens in a fairly hostile environment socially is really important to what's going on in the story.
Very racist and homophobic at that time.
And that's... But for me, the fact that it's called Beautiful Thing and that there's beautiful colours throughout and it's summer the whole time and everyone's kind of happy, and the whole California music thing for me just all fits together to make it into at the time, a very novel film. In the 90s in the UK, you did not see gay films or TV that had happy endings. That didn't happen, and it kind of there needed to be a happy ending film. And for me, this totally is that. All of those things conspire to make it a really positive experience. These days in the mainstream media, gay characters, LGBT characters are portrayed much more evenly than they ever used to be. But it was always tragic endings and horrible lives and sinister stuff going on.
Lives of shame.
For me, absolutely, shame and all that kind of stuff. This, for me, was integrated. The characters are integrated into sort of regular society, for want of a better word. They're not playing out some little drama sort of separate to everybody else. They're in the rest of the world, and they are able to be who they need to be ultimately. And that was really rare at the time, and that's why, for me, watching it as I did back when I was, an infant, it was so important because it was a positive portrayal in a way that you just didn't see in the UK at the time.
So for those who don't know the story, I mean, it's basically, like you say, a very long, hot summer in London, and it was genuinely very hot that year. I'm guessing it was filmed in 95, because it obviously came out in 96. Jamie, he's played by Glenn Berry. He's bunking off school, more than usual, on the Thamesmead estate. He lives with his mother Sandra, who's brilliantly played by Linda Henry. Of course, we know her in EastEnders now. The neighbour Leah, who again is brilliantly performed. Tamika Empson, such a great, funny performance. I mean, she thinks she's Mama Cass. She's obsessed by Mums and Papas. Jamie's sporty classmate Steve, played by Scott Neal. He's getting beaten up at home. His dad is a complete arsehole. His brother is a complete arsehole. I mean, his brother beats him up as well. So there's a lot of conflicts. There's a lot of depressing elements to the film, but I think they're counteracted by that very uplifting story and very important story. But, there is a lot of sunshine as well as the grittiness.
I've written a list here of some of the funniest lines from this film. I'm not going to read them all out because if anyone knows the film, they'll know them all. And most of them, I've got to say, come from Linda Henry's lips. But she let one of the most brilliant lines ever uttered in British cinematic history. For instance, going to a teenage party to find out what her son is up to, fighting her way through the kind of crowds of all these adolescents who are off their faces on cheap ease. And one of them says something kind of slightly suggestive and flirty to her because he fancies her chances with the older woman. And she just turns to him with this acid line and just says, "Have a wank, big bollocks." I mean, what a brilliant line. What a brilliant way to get rid of someone. I mean, the film is so full of her amazing one-liners. She's asked... she asks Leah why she's so obsessed with Mama Cass at one point, and she says, "What's wrong with Madonna?" And she says the answer to that question is, "Well, Madonna's a slag." She just has all these incredible comic moments. I think that for me, the darkness of that context that you're talking about is really counterbalanced by the wit and the wisdom, actually, of some of the characters.
Yeah, totally. There's another great line as well from Linda Henry where they're talking about the Gloucester, the gay pub in Greenwich. I used to go there quite a lot, and we'll come on to that in a minute. But she's talking to her son, and he says, "How did you know that was a gay pub?" And she said, "It's got a big pink neon arse hanging outside of it." Just like, there are so many great lines. But of course, Jonathan Harvey, we know he's brilliant at those one-liners. And those are liners that everybody recites when they talk about beautiful thing. Yeah. So the Gloucester is that pub, obviously, that they go to and the relationship develops. The Gloucester, did you ever go there, Chris? Because I used to go there all the time. I lived just up the road in Surrey Quays. I worked up there as well because I worked at Our Price back in the days of Our Price music store. And a friend of mine who's actually in the film, you see the back of his head in the pub scene, he worked at the Albany in Deptford, because I used to work there as well. He used to run a night called If. So it's a real moment in time because my colleague that I used to work with at Our Price, to cut a long story short, he used to live with Kevin. So he was part of that team that they talk about in the Q&A, that, all the extras in the film were friends. They were all part of that scene. They were part of the gay scene in London, the LGBT scene. So, I think it's really of its time, but even though, when you look at it now, it hasn't dated. It doesn't feel dated, but it feels very of its time. Back in the mid to late 90s, it was very different back then. People weren't as accepting, but I think it's really celebrating the fact that it has made an impact on how we've changed our behaviours.
Definitely. For me, that's what's really interesting about the way this has been packaged for the re-release, with the bonus features, because they're celebratory. They're about the fact the film has stood a test of time. There's a contemporary dance piece which is based on the same themes. The commentary is obviously a contemporary commentary. The one thing that isn't contemporary is a historic documentary about what it was like to live in Thamesmead, which is really interesting, from 1974. There's a Q&A, which, to be honest, I felt was really clumsily put together as an extra. It's a bit, it's kind of a filmed a bit amateurishly, which is a shame because it was actually looked like it was probably quite an interesting event, but the filming wasn't great. I didn't think for that.
I actually thought the Q&A itself was brilliant. Our friend, I think you're friends with David Robson, who hosted it. Are you friends with David Robson? I think he did such a great job hosting that. And I thought the answers were really interesting. But you're right, because it is one shot pretty much, isn't it? And you don't see the audience that are asking questions at the end, I guess, because that's people want to be anonymous, I suppose.
Yeah, there'll be a whole bunch of reasons why. I mean, it kind of, I suspect it was being filmed at the time, not necessarily to be a DVD extra, and then they ended up putting it on a DVD extra.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think what's great is having contact in that Q&A with some of the people who participate in making the film and being in it. And Dave Lynn is in it, the drag queen that's in the film. He's there, and he's such a national treasure. And he's still in the Q&A. He performs like the drag queen he always was on stage.
Yeah.
I mean, he's just brilliant in the Q&A. I think he's great.
And there's obviously an unveiling of the plaque that was presented to the Gloucester, now known as the Greenwich Tavern. Is it the Greenwich Tavern? Because they've changed the name, but obviously it's the same pub. I mean, it doesn't look any different when you look at the footage. But yeah, there's like a 2 or 3 minute piece on the people that were there. I think it was the LGBT network that were there, and I saw a few people that I recognise. Yeah. So it's great because obviously they were going on to that after the Q&A, and that's where all the drinks came out and they were partying. But yeah, some really fascinating, bits of information, some tidbits on how the film came together, and obviously from the director's perspective as well. Such a great movie. Matt, you haven't seen it since the 90s. I'm curious to know what you would think of it now, because I kind of got more from it seeing it more recently. Like I said, I don't think it's dated at all.
I'm assuming I'd get a lot more from it now, having lived a life. Let me do the math in my head. 28 years later since the release of it? Obviously a lot of life experience, and you can look back and be like, what was I like when I was 24 or 26 or whatever time it was, and get a lot more out of the experience of looking at someone. I'm not so close to the age that I can't have distance on it and see what it's like to be a young person just coming out, just having a first relationship or attempting to have a first relationship, and what that's like. So I'm assuming it'd be pretty profound experience, whereas when you're younger, it's just like, oh, it's just another experience of someone my age. That's great, whatever. You don't really think about the ramifications of that experience until you're older. And like you said, the story is simple enough that it could probably be remade now relatively the same way, maybe with cell phones added, but the gist of the story could be the same.
Watching it last night, I found it more of an emotional experience than I did at the time. I thought it was moving back then. I suppose that's just because I'm older, and I remember what it's like to come out back, because back at the time that it was released, I was out to my friends. I wasn't out to my parents, because I think I was like 26 or something, even though that's quite late, I suppose, compared to some people coming out. But yeah, I just remember it being, just an important thing, an important film for me at the time, because it resonated with me.
This is why I think it's still a really contemporary film, because I think, a conversation I have with people quite frequently, in fact, I had it earlier today with someone, is that I don't feel like I came out once. I feel like I come out about 3 times a week, because I'm having to explain to people that I'm not married, that I don't have kids, and that my life isn't like their lives. I mean, I genuinely feel like I'm coming out all the time. And I think something that you don't perhaps realise when you're a lot younger, you kind of think, well, you just say it once and you're out, and that's it. You're done. Everyone knows you're out. My experience has certainly been, and I know that that's just my experience, that you're constantly having to do it, actually. And you get stronger every single time you do it, and you're able to do it in different ways to how you did when you were younger. But it's a story that we are constantly having to tell as LGBT people, that the straight people they don't have to come out once. We do it multiply throughout all of our lives. And I think for us, certainly for me, this film is always going to resonate for that reason. It's always there because it's something we're always having to do.
Well said. What did you think of the picture quality? I thought it was a fantastic restoration. I mean, I don't remember it being grainy back then, but I've always thought of Beautiful Thing as having like a graininess to it. And you're right about it being the summer and there being lots of colour, because the colours do really pop when you watch this new Blu-ray. I think it looks great.
Yeah, absolutely. It's probably got the level of impact that they originally intended to have at the time now, because it popped. It's contemporary, it's happy, and yes, okay, the decor's pretty much 1996. You wouldn't paint your living
very
room
changing rooms, isn't it? I mean, her living room, Linda Henry's living room, is very changing rooms. Was it purple and yellow?
It's like your study, actually, Phil, just behind us now.
yeah, it's a bit blue and yellow, isn't it? Oops.
I was going to say,
Inspired.
Stuck in 1996. But yeah, I mean, look, it's a beautifully restored film, and it's absolutely worthy of it, and it's it's a great DVD. It's properly given it a new lease of life for me. Actually, it's a film that I come back to once in a while and just watch again. But this reissue there's something very celebratory about it, and it's a great reissue. It's a sort of, this is how you should do reissues. This is a good one.
Isn't it crazy? It's never been out on Blu-ray before in all this time, nearly 30 years.
Phil, I remember reading maybe a year ago or so that you were talking about this film just kind of randomly, I think, because this reissue wasn't out yet. And you mentioned the two lead actors, and one of the actors wrote you back it was on social media and wrote you back in the comments about the film. And I think that was really fantastic. Do you remember that conversation?
I do. I remember it really well. I think I posted something on Twitter asking people if they like or dislike the film. It was just as simple as that, and it was a beautiful thing. I knew what the reaction was going to be. I knew, even across the pond, I knew that people were going to like it outside of the UK. And it was Glenn Berry, who plays Jamie. He replied back because I think the other actor is gay, isn't he? He plays Steve, Scott Neal. But Jamie, Glenn Berry, is a straight actor. But he is very proud of this film, and you'll see that in the special features as well, in the interview and the Q&A. He says, it's a life-changing moment for him to be part of it, and he's very proud of the film. But and the reaction was just incredible, and everybody was replying back saying how important the film was to them, particularly growing up and coming out. And I think he was just really humble. I think he was genuinely touched with the response to the tweets, because it went nuts. People were retweeting and replying back with stuff. It wasn't necessarily anything that we've mentioned in a video. It was just a tweet.
Yeah, that's great. That must have been a great experience for him to get this kind of onslaught of love for his portrayal and what he was involved with. Because if you don't think about that every day, all of a sudden one day all these people are remembering your work and just flooding you with praise. It must have been a pretty overwhelmingly great experience, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it was a fun experience as well. That's mentioned, isn't it, Chris, in the Q&A, that everybody had such a ball making this film, and it was a really nice atmosphere that everybody came together, and obviously there were a lot of friends on set as well. We're going to go for a star rating. I know that's quite unusual with the reissue, but I think there's so much to pack in here, because obviously we've got to think about the restoration and the special features. I mean, for me anyway, the film is a 5-star because I think it's so important and I love it to pieces. I mean, there's not anything in it that I would have wanted them to have changed, or there's no downside. I mean, I think it's just a perfect movie. So yeah, with the special features and the restoration, it is definitely still a 5.
Yeah, look. It's been a film that's been with me through a lot of my adult life. It's still got massive relevance to me. It will always have a big piece in my heart. And I think it's a great restoration. I think it's a great reissue. It's really timely with what's going on politically across the world at the moment and in the UK. So it's a great time for it to come out. It's a great time for it to be revisited, and it's a great time for it to be celebrated. So absolutely, I'm going to join you. 5 out of 5.
And what about you, Matt? I know you haven't seen all of the new version of it, but you remember the film, the impact it had on you.
Yeah, I do, and I would give it a 5 as well. Especially at that time, you didn't have such a well-made, positive film, especially about young gay people, that was just like almost unheard of, unless it was some tiny, tiny indie film that no one saw. I thought it was fantastic that it had this air of being like, I think Mike Leigh was starting to become a big name at that point, at least in the US, or a bigger name. So it felt like something like that, like an art film, like a critically acclaimed film, but finally about gay people, and finally about young gay people. I thought that was kind of remarkable at the time.
So it's a beautiful thing. 5 stars from all of us, and it is coming out on Blu-ray. Like I say, it's available on Blu-ray, so let us know what you think of the movie down in the comments below, and the reissue if you're buying it, and we'd love to continue the conversation as well, I'm guessing. Chris, Matt, always good to see you. Thank you very much, and we'll see you on the next one.